Evening, everybody. It's 6:30. Welcome to the third instalment of the Audit and Accounts Committee this year. I'll start with the fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through reception and meet in War Memorial Park. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet and is available to view on YouTube after the meeting. With regards to microphones, can I please remind members and officers that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, that you must speak directly into your microphone. The microphone stem can be moved so that it is as close as possible. And please switch your mobile phones to silent. Moving on to the agenda, apologies for absence and substitutions. We've received apologies from Richard Harbord, the independent committee member, and Councillor Ken Rattigan. We don't have any substitutions. Item 2 of the agenda, declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any declarations of interest. I'm looking around the room, I'm getting shakes of heads, so I don't believe there are any. Moving on to item 3, urgent matters. I don't believe there are any urgent matters. That's confirmed. Moving on to item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of September 2023. The minutes are in your pack. Are the committee happy that the minutes of the meeting held on 25th September 23 are an accurate record? Yeah. So I will sign the minutes. I've moved the agenda around a little bit tonight. I just want to, you may recall that last time around we talked about having a list of actions. Officers, Phil in particular, have been very helpful in helping to craft that list of actions. We're going to just cover it straight after the minutes, so I've just inserted it at item 4A. The intention here is really to just make sure that we don't let things slip off the list that we talked about last time or the time before. And so I was intending to just whiz through the list of 8 and just to make sure that anything that's coming up tonight we cover, and anything that's deferred to later is deferred to later. So I think it's at the back of your pack. Item 1 relates to 2 recommendations from the audit report. Adam Swain has been very kind in giving us a thorough summary of what's happened with that item. I mean, I consider that item done. So if we can mark that one done, unless anyone disagrees. Item 2, an update about IFRS 16 preparations. Again, I would kind of like to see a column here which just gives us a date of review, so that we know when we look at this as committee members or as officers that actually we're not really going to talk about this one tonight. So I've just penciled Q2 2024 in for this one with a question mark, unless anyone wants to discuss that in more detail. Item 3, this is relating to the proposed changes to contract standing orders, which I think was raised by Councillor Rattigan last time. Unfortunately, he's not here tonight, but Sue Curden's very kindly told us that's coming to Council in February, and that we'll get a circulated version beforehand. Will that be by email, Sue, or will it come as an item of business to this meeting? So again, I think that can go down as closed. Item 4, Audit and Accounts Work Programme, Arling Close to provide training. I think that's TBC. Item 5, inviting UC Valera, the head of IT. I think that's next year after the cyber audit, so Q2 or Q3 next year. Item 6, internal audit progress report. Oh no, sorry, that's the one he's attending next year. Okay, that's Q1 2024. Item 7, internal audit progress report, July to August. this is the climate emergency item to be referred to the Cabinet Member for Climate and Ecological Emergency. That's also closed and has been done. And item 8, the self-assessment questionnaire of effectiveness, also done and closed. Thank you for the list, it's most helpful. Councillor Tustain.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to 5, we're talking about the training. Are we going to just, that has gone out, so technically that action's complete. Did you think that it was worth us having any checking to see whether it's taken up or anything?
Thank you, Councillor Tustain. You've actually jogged my memory to what my notes here mean. Yeah, you're right, it is complete. And I wondered whether the committee wanted to see that as an annual item. As just something that, because otherwise it's the sort of thing that I think it just values a refresher, doesn't it? Out of interest, did anyone watch the videos or read the report? I know Councillor Faulkner did. I think my note round said, we are the weakest link in some of this stuff. So if you could read that would be helpful. But I think if we can keep that on the list for an annual update or an annual cycle, I think that would be helpful. Moving on to item 5, fraud update, protecting the public purse. I'm going to ask the officer, Paul Gundry, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is my regular report to the committee. It's the half-yearly position on how we're protecting the public purse. So it just gives you that mid-year statement. The end-of-year report will come to you in July. As I mentioned, it's in the usual format. I wasn't going to introduce anything further in the report, so I think it stands as it is. So I was just asked for the report to be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any comments or questions anyone has? Councillor Isaac.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much, Paul, for the report. Just a few questions. I see that housing benefit fraud is now, as I understand this report, is now the responsibility of the government organisation, the Single Fraud Investigation Service. Is that correct? No.
It's the DWP. The Single Fraud Investigation Service is part of the DWP who we liaise with.
Okay, so I imagine that housing fraud was a big responsibility on our shoulders for many years, and that's now been relieved. So if I'm right in that, what implications has that had in relation to our resourcing?
Yep, so this change took place in 2014. I think that's in my introductory paragraph 2.4. At the time, benefit fraud was the primary work of the fraud team, of which there was 2 resources. I put forward a business case for a fraud team to remain because there wasn't any work done in terms of the proactive work. Looking at other areas of fraud like the council tax side of things, I can go on the National Fraud Initiative, which is a central government initiative. So it actually took away the focus pure on housing benefits to actually give it more of a rounded approach, which I believe was the right thing to do at the time, and still believe it's the right thing.
So you're saying that it didn't have any effect on our resourcing?
Correct. It's just refocused the resources.
Councillor Tustain.
Thank you, Chair. Another question on that. If this is moved across to sort of central government, what's going to be the impact on actually getting monies recovered?
So again, this has been in place since 2014. If the DWP identify a housing benefit fraud which is proven, we're informed, and our Exchequer Services team will recover their housing benefit in an invoice debt or collected from their ongoing benefit if they're still in receipt of housing benefit.
It's just just to clarify that, is the money coming from us? So the housing. So I'm just wondering whether it's this a central fund and we used to just collect it and then pass it back to the government. I'm just not clear about where it's coming from and going.
I'm not an expert on the housing benefit administration side of things. I see Sue's holding her hand up. So thank you.
Sue?
So as an authority, we obviously, based on government legislation and guidelines and rates, etc., we pay out housing benefit to those that are eligible. We recover that through a subsidy from the government, so it's an in and out to some extent for our purposes. Depending on the type of fraud and how it came about, some of that is not recoverable by the local authority, but we are subsidised for it if we can show that it's not our error. And also we claim for anything that's being recovered. It's an oddity in terms of how it works, but we are effectively reimbursed for it.
Councillor Faulkner?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I could cast a comment on it, I think one of the reasons we went to DWP was because under the laws at that time, they had the ability to look at all the records across government departments, and they had the power to then take money from other benefits, say pensions or unemployment benefit. So it basically put a bit of a noose around the necks of those that would be trying to fiddle one part of the system, and it would be contra about on another part. So it was quite a neat way of doing it.
Any further questions? I don't see any. I just one question springs to mind, Paul, if I may. Do you think that our level of fraud and the resourcing that we attach to it are appropriate for that level of fraud?
$64,000 question, that one. I would work on the basis that if you gave me more resources, I'd probably find more fraud, because it's the typical iceberg scenario. I think that's probably the best way to answer that one.
Thank you. I'll ask the committee to note the contents of the report. Noted, thank you. Moving on to item 6, quarter 2 annual property plan monitoring. I'm going to ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Gavin James, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I've spent some time reading this and trying to work out an interesting way, an exciting way of introducing it, but it's a struggle. What I will do is reassure the committee that just because there's nothing significant transactions taking place during this quarter does not mean the property department aren't incredibly busy looking at lots of things. We do know there's a couple of things agreed by Cabinet and now in the final negotiations schemes. It actually highlights in the report that some of these, certainly lease re-gears, do take a lot of time. I was actually recently at Grosvenor House, which is mentioned in here. Started its life, I think, under Councillor Isaac's watch. A very tired relic of the 60s, awful looking building, boarded up. Sorry, yes, a tired relic of the... No, I was talking about the property, honestly, John. So it was an awful looking building, an eyesore and a drain and a drag on the Basingstoke in terms of trying to promote it. And what Arena have done with it is nothing short of fantastic. They've recycled the building, they haven't knocked it down, and if you drive past it, it looks completely different. It looks brand new and very sort of attractive. I was in there and already, even though there's builders on site, a number of new businesses moved in. It's one of the more modern sort of lets where you don't have a big company take over the whole building. You've got numerous companies on various floors, and there's lots of shared facilities, rooftop bar, say grey water recycling, improved its environmental attributes. Those kind of deals do take a long time to do, but Arena has spent £30 million in Basingstoke, which shows that there is a confidence that Basingstoke has a bright future. So we'll see more deals like that coming forward in the future, hopefully. But nothing within the report unless there's any questions.
Councillor Tustain.
Thank you. I had a question around the rent reviews due and the review of them, because obviously we've got 51. It was 49, the last report, we're now gone up to 51. And I just wondered, is this a cumulative or is this what's just been completed in this quarter? Because obviously if this is accumulative, it's questionable whether we'll manage to complete them all.
It's a good question, Councillor Tustain. Who's going to pick that one up? Liz.
Yeah. So in terms of the total due is the total due in this financial year, and and then it's sort of showing what's in progress. So the review, some of these aren't even due yet. So if it's due in sort of February, that will probably take longer to negotiate because the evidence won't be around at the time. So this is really just to show the progress throughout the year, or per quarter, and it's the cumulative total rent is sort of builds on what was reported last time. So that will be, hopefully, yeah, you'll see that grow. I think it's fair to say in the current market, sometimes some rent reviews are still, maybe at a nil increase, or, there's various sort of intricacies on each review, but just to sort of reassure you that they're all being looked at when they come
It's
due.
probably worth just highlighting as well that there's a temporary extra resource in the team that was dedicated to dealing with the backlog of rent reviews, and that role has been extended to the end of the financial year, I believe. Councillor Tustain?
So the supplementary really on that is, do you feel confident that we'll actually manage to get through them all in the financial year?
I would say we're on track at the moment, but it depends if other priorities come along. Some of them might be, we'll focus on the higher value rent reviews, so it's always sort of, it's a move, and we'll also review the resource as we go through the year, really.
Councillor Isaac?
Liz, thank you for the report. And just a few points. Firstly, I'm pleased to see the extent to which age debt has been reduced from this time last year. So I'm interested to know how that's been achieved, because that's true on the properties that we manage in-house, and also the ones that are done for us by Savills, but it's not true in relation to the Mals, and there may be reasons for that. So that's question one. Question two, just some reassurance that the capital projects that you've been allocated funds for by the council, that you are actually making good progress in getting those projects underway, so that Councillor James won't have the problem of explaining in 6 months' time or 9 months' time why it is that money that's been allocated has not been spent, having been there on too many occasions. He could look back every year, I think. That would be interesting. Third question is, why are no EPCs on 12 of our properties? And fourthly, how are we doing with the programme of capital disposals? Because there is a programme for that, but it's not referenced here. Be interesting to know.
I think Sue wants to answer one of those.
Before Liz gives an update, just want to say, obviously we can't talk about specific, I know Liz knows this, but we can't talk about specific individual cases in terms of the bad debt, just the generic actions that we've undertaken. I'll let Liz answer those, and then I will, if there's anything you would pick up, I'll come back in.
Okay, thanks. So in relation to specifically the age debt and the question about the difference on the Mals, there are a couple of ongoing disputes which are close to sort of reaching agreement on, sort of particularly these sort of both Savills and the JLO ones link into service charge, and that often is an area sort of contentious for tenants and needs a bit more justification. But I think it's worth pointing out that in 11.4 the rent collection sort of within the 90 days is up at sort of 98.83%. So over the period, so by the time the next sort of charges become due, we are sort of close to getting sort of, well, we're over sort of 98% recovery on those.
Yeah, very good.
In terms of the capital programme, that doesn't sit under my sort of control, and that's often reported at another board, I think.
I saw Councillor James first. If I give him a chance on that.
Councillor Isaac will know that there is a real problem trying to procure the resource to contractors to carry out work. There are a number of bits in the capital programme which you'll be aware of that are for other agencies to do that haven't done them, and it is tiring. And my view is we need to get a lot harsher, because we can use that capital on other projects if they're not going to be spent appropriately. Obviously, where we have the responsibility to maintain a property, we absolutely must, because that's our contractual responsibility as the landlord. But where we're doing extra additional work, then I start to question whether or not we should be paying for it if the organisation responsible isn't shifting forward. So where there's a good excuse, where there is a problem with labour, there is a problem with contractors, because that's the climate we're in, we'll look at that. But you're right, I mean, we will have the same problem in terms of progressing capital schemes on time, because we just can't get the resources to do it. And then we've got to review it. If it's never going to happen, well, let's put the money to better use.
Sue, you want to add anything?
The only thing I would add to that is that in certain schemes, before we can incur the spend, there is a requirement around, for example, new leases and that being in place. So where some of those are taking longer than anticipated, more so because of not the council side of things, but the lessee, we can't engage in those capital works until those documents are legally signed. So there may well be some delays around those particular activities.
And Liz?
Sorry, I forgot to add about the you questioned about the disposals programme. In relation to that, we're undertaking due diligence on, I think I sort of mentioned 2 disposals, which are likely to sort of, we will bring forward sort of either the end of this financial year, beginning of next one. So timing basically varies depending on the market, and that's sort of under constant review in consultation with our strategic advisors, JLL. EPC.
There was a question on EPCs.
Oh yes, EPCs. Sorry.
Question related to
I've
why we
picked
have
up
12.
on this, I suppose, since I joined, and making sure that we are compliant. So some of them, I think, were possibly recorded. It was, I think, having reviewed the legislation, some of them that didn't have an EPC were related to sort of public conveniences, and we're not actually required to have an EPC on those. So.
I did just want to add that there's almost 50 properties there that have moved from a low-rated or no-rated EPC to into a E or above. I wanted to congratulate officers on achieving so much work so quickly. Thank you, Liz, to you and your team. If there are no further questions, then I'd like to ask the committee to note the report.
Noted.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7. This is UK GDPR notification of a data breach. There's actually 2 data breaches in here. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with information relating to those data breaches. I will ask the Legal Officer Anne Greaves to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So we have a duty to report serious data breaches to the ICO, and a serious data breach is one that is, well, you report it unless it's unlikely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. So these were reported to the ICO. In addition, we notified the data subjects themselves because there was a high risk to their rights and freedoms. At the moment, we still haven't heard back from the ICO, so we don't know if they're going to make any recommendations. Although it has been some time, they are inundated. Both the data breaches arise due to human error to some extent, and obviously they could have had more serious consequences than they did in these particular instances. I'm happy to answer any questions.
There don't appear to be any questions around the room. I had, I think you summarise it correctly, Anne, that you know these are down to human error, but could have had or could still have much more serious consequences. And I just wondered if we have taken steps to address the training and or the issues around human error before we wait for the reply from the ICO, or whether we're waiting until they tell us what they think and then we'll act.
Well, all staff do annual GDPR training anyway. In relation to the council tax team, we have had a number of incidents which don't amount to serious enough breaches to report them to the ICO. So we have done some extensive training with that team to see if we can reduce the incidences coming from that team. Likewise with the housing team, you know, we've met with them and discussed, you know, what happened in relation to this data breach. In terms of the consequences, you know, we've tried to put the data subjects affected back into the position they would have been if it hadn't have happened. And certainly the one in relation to the council tax was very happy with how we had dealt with it. But, you know, the ICO is obviously a different ball game, and we need to wait and see what they say.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'll ask the committee if they're happy to note the contents of the report. Thank you. Moving on to item 8, Treasury Management 2023-24 mid-year report. This report shows the activity within the Council's Treasury Management function between the 1st of April to the 30th September 2023. I'll ask Adam Swain, the officer, to introduce the report. I'm sorry, Sue Curden's going to introduce it.
Just briefly. I will hand over to Adam in a minute, who will take you through the monitoring position to date this year. I just wanted to comment on something that's been added into the report as a one-off for this particular round. Concern has been raised with myself and the Chief Executive Officer around the monies that we hold in our external bond funds, how they came about, how they are monitored, and what assurance we have that, you know, we're holding them for the right amount of time, and, you know, what ongoing advice and support do we have related to that, and are we happy with just having one, effectively one Treasury Management advisor looking at that on our behalf. So what I agreed to do was to have an additional appendix added to this particular report, which is Appendix 2 on page 59, which gives the history of how the current bond fund investments came to fruition, what's happened to them in that time, and it culminates in a table with the officer's current thinking around each of those investments. Of the £70 million we currently have, the current alternative investment strategy, which was approved by Council last February, identifies that £25 million of that £70 million will be realised in order to support the senior infrastructure funding for Manydown. And part of that was because we'd already identified that 2 of the particular bond schemes we no longer felt were meeting the Council's Treasury Management strategy. And so actually that was, it linked across into being able to utilise that funding for that purpose. Of the remaining bonds, we look at them on a monthly basis. We have ongoing advice and support from our Treasury Management advisors, Arlene Close. They bring to this committee a half-yearly external funds report, and following the last committee meeting, where they were asked to look at more than just their own suite of investments that they recommend to local authorities, we've now asked them to obviously look at other instruments outside of their recommendation. But I think it is worth remembering that they work on behalf of the local authorities, and therefore they recommend instruments that are suitable for local authorities and the use of public sector funding. So whilst our bonds might or might not perform differently or more adversely against some other bonds that are in the market, they may not actually be suitable for local authority investment. And I think it's worth noting that one of the things that we've been asked to do is in terms of should we have a second advisor, have a look at our funds for us. I think it's important that we recognise that with £25 million already coming out, a third fund currently being reviewed and is shown as sort of an amber in table 1 on page 66. We will be looking at the capital investment requirements of the capital over the period of the capital programme, which may or may not involve needing to realise some more of that funding. So the proposal will be that we look at all of that as part of the capital programme update and the capital strategy update and the treasury management strategy update that goes to council in February. And a recommendation will come forward in terms of those particular bonds. We obviously have our full portfolio review every year with our treasury management advisors, and at the current time, I don't believe that there is a need for us to have a secondary advisor look at the same information that we're already receiving. However, I think it is prudent to put into the treasury management strategy that on a 5-year periodic basis we will seek to have a touch base, if you like, in terms of a sense check with a secondary advisor to ensure that, you know, to give and I have to be honest, it will be giving members comfort. I think not me, because I think I'm quite happy that with the advice that we're receiving, but I think if that gives members comfort, and it also normally when we take out a bond we're looking to keep it between 5 and 7 years, so that feels about right in terms of reviewing whether it's still appropriate to hold the bond if nothing's come up in our normal monitoring as to why we would like to review how we do it. So really that was for information. I think in discussion with the chair, I think the chair has suggested that also forms part of the ongoing training material, which I think is a really good idea because it does give a lot of history as to how we've got to where we are. But I'm happy to take any questions on it, but I think what's important is actually myself and Adam, along with officers, look at the whole portfolio of activity every single month, but we have particular focus around the external funds with ongoing advice and support from our treasury advisors. So we do look at more than just the income return that we have during the year. We are looking at the cycle of how long we should hold the bonds, when is an appropriate time to dispose of them. So one of them should be disposed of by the end of this financial year, with one further one identified, as I said, to support the ongoing infrastructure funding for many down. But we will look at the others in relation to the capital programme update when it goes in February. But I'll hand over to Adam for the other update.
I've got Councillor Phillimore and Councillor Isaac, but I think Adam was next in line, if he has anything to add. But there'll be an opportunity to do that once Adam's spoken as well.
I'll keep it brief, Chair, but just to kind of points to note in the paper, Treasury Management income is forecast to be 4.84 million this year, which is 0.14 million higher than forecast. The return is forecast to be 4.13% at the moment, which is slightly below the budgeted amount of 4.24. The reason for that difference there is partly because of the holdings of Treasury Management investments in cash at the moment are slightly higher than were forecast at this time of the year. And the rates are kind of blended, so it's the reason for the difference there. Investment balances at 30th of September even were 135.65 million, and as Sue's mentioned, we're obviously looking at divesting from one of the bonds towards the end of the year. We're looking for the best time to do that while monitoring kind of the potential loss there. Chart 5 shows our performance for our external funds. That's on page 53, which shows that our performance is above average and is one of the lowest risks out of the benchmark group that Arden Close provide us. And again, chart 4 shows our internal performance, which shows that we're above average for return, and again in the lower quartile for risk. That was all I was going to cover in the report.
Thank you, Adam. Councillor Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sue and Adam, for some great history on the information. It's much appreciated on external bond fund investments. There's one little question: is should the history of the property fund be included as well? And is there a reason why it's not in terms of the CCLA local authorities property fund?
Sue,
So,
you want to take
so
that one?
we were specifically asked to look at the external bonds, which is what that's in relation to. The CCLA fund is, as you can see from Appendix 1, is separated out as a separate type of investment activity.
Where did that question come from, Sue? Who specifically asked for that?
It was requested by Councillor Cubitt.
Okay. Okay. Councillor Isaac?
Thank you, Chair. So this won't come as any surprise to Sue because she and I have talked about this periodically. I do have some concerns about relying too much on Arling Close. I think they're a very good organisation. So I've got there's nothing in my experience of Arling Close which suggests that they're not a top flight advisor, but we're talking about large sums of money, many millions of pounds, and it seemed to me to be good practice periodically to have to seek the views of another advisor. We did that in the past with KPMG, and one does need to bear in mind that Arling Close are very specialist. They focus very much on local government, which is fine, but again, that there could be some underlying dangers associated with that particular perspective on financial investments, and so I would still feel more comfortable, given the amount that the money involved and what's at stake, if a check could be made periodically by another party, which would give us just a reassurance that the path that we're on is the right path.
Councillor Tustain, your question.
Thank you, Chair. Having sat on this committee prior to us having inflationary cycles, I remember talking around the bonds, and obviously bonds being something that I believe don't perform very well in an inflationary period. So I just wanted the reassurance. Obviously, looking at how the portfolio works, we've obviously got around just under half actually in these bonds, 41% I believe it is, fixed rate bonds. By removing them, if inflation's coming down, obviously they're not performing very well, so we're losing money, so I get that, but it's just understanding the rationale behind it and making sure this isn't just like, oh, they're really doing badly, we should be coming out, because obviously these are where we keep ourselves at a low risk. But then in previous conversations, I know on this committee, we've also talked about that perhaps we are actually possibly over-cautious, and I know that conversation has been had, so thoughts around that.
Thank you, Councillor Tustain. I think Sue wants to come back on that.
So obviously when we go into those sort of longer term investments, and obviously in this particular case the external bonds, we are looking at it from a long term point of view, because obviously the values do go up and down, and you're absolutely right, that when we're getting a lovely interest rate return on our revenue income, it is quite highly possible that the capital value of the investment is impacted. We have to be mindful so we monitor it as an overall portfolio of activity, and look at the overall potential impact on the revenue bottom line and the council. But also what we have to look at is, at the time, there was no, for example, requirement from a capital investment point of view, so we needed to look at other long-term investment opportunities. In terms of, so not only do we monitor how those particular are performing, so we wouldn't just come out of it just because it's performing badly. If the one we're looking at the moment in terms of the one that's identified as amber is because actually it's the revenue return and the capital return that are not doing well. So we're looking at it from the point of view of just trying to understand what's happened to the underlying assets within those funds, that's causing that issue, and we will take it under review. What we also have to consider in terms of moving forward, if we found ourselves in the situation of wanting to undertake significant capital investment, we have to look at the cheapest way of actually providing that additional funding to the council, one of which might be to divest from our external funds, because actually that might be cheaper than, for example, borrowing or reducing our overall property assets, for example. So we look at it from a number of different points of view. In recent years, the review has been more about performance rather than other related activity. But in terms of where we are at the moment, we're looking at it for a number of different reasons. So no, we wouldn't just divest because it looks like it's going down, because obviously that impacts on the revenue account in that year. So if we genuinely felt, for example, that there was a need to come out of one of the bonds, we would look at how we manage that in terms of positive capital values as well in relation to our other bonds, and to see what the best activity would be to come out of that. But we have to look at it as a long-term investment, and as long as it's still meeting our treasury management strategy requirements, we have to weigh up whether it's better to come out and have a, say a £1.5 million loss to the revenue account, or whether it's better to stay in at a slightly lower interest rate and continue to monitor it.
It's interesting to listen to the debate. I think it was Councillor Rattigan that raised the issue of two advisors at the last meeting. And I completely hear what you're saying, Councillor Isaac, about that. And Sue and I have talked about this as well. I think what's quite interesting from my perspective is that the situation's changing. And I think if we still had £80 million under investment, and perhaps we were planning to add to that, which we did some years ago, then I think we would be starting to move into a position where I think the Treasury Management Strategy undergoes a review anyway, but might perhaps benefit from a slightly different focus in that review. And that focus may be around how do we ensure we get best value for money, best returns for residents. I think the change highlights why perhaps the current Treasury Management Strategy doesn't necessarily put that first, although it puts it high up in the list. And that is that it leaves officers with the discretion to manage our capital base in the context of the capital budget. And I think the changes with many down and the investment that's going to be required there now mean that the discussions we were having about this investment portfolio 6 to 12 months ago that started us on this journey, which has led to that Appendix 2, means that actually that flexibility that officers have at the moment is quite valuable to them and quite valuable to the council. And in the context of a smaller investment portfolio after that capital investment, it's likely that I think what the arguments about having a single advisor, and that advisor being whoever it may be, are perhaps strengthened. Whereas if the journey of travel had been different, then I think that perhaps the balance would have swung the other way. John, you want to add?
Sorry, I fundamentally disagree with you. I think we're talking about so many millions of pounds. We're going to have many millions that are the responsibility of the in-house team to manage. And so this is an ongoing situation, and therefore I still remain of the view that it would be better. It would be better if we were able to demonstrate to our residents that we have not just relied on one advisor if anything were to go wrong.
I think it's a good point, John. I don't dispute that at all. I think I was just trying to give some context about where the conversation, where the journey has been on this committee. I think. Does anyone else have a view they want to share? Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Now, recently, banks are offering a very high rate of interest on investments. Is it? So, shall I finish the question? So, is it beneficial for us, or how can we make more beneficial on this policy?
Sue?
So the Treasury Management Strategy is set by Council, obviously as recommended by me. And within there, we have a number of instruments that we can invest in. And one of the things that we don't tend to, other than short-term cash, we don't invest in banks and building societies because they don't actually meet our rating requirements in terms of meeting our Treasury Management Strategy. So we obviously look at everything that's within our current strategy. We look at everything on an ongoing basis to make sure that we are maximising the returns we can get. Obviously, the long-term investments are long-term investments. They're within, but they're held for a number of years in the same activity. The short-term activity is dealt with on a daily basis. And if I may just come back and say that whilst, of course, we have our Treasury Management advisors, we do have some suitably qualified and very experienced internal staff that look after the Treasury Management activity. So it is a combination of internal resource and knowledge and experience, plus our Treasury Management advisors, plus ongoing conversations with a number of other brokers and a number of funds that come up all the time. So it is an ongoing, continuous discussion, but I understand the points that are being raised.
I think I'll come to you next, Councillor Hussey. I just wanted to add, I wasn't aware that we had a dedicated officer who's dedicated solely and specifically to this, whose name is Mark Dewars, and he prepared Appendix 2, which I think is an excellent paper. I'll come to Councillor Hussey.
Just picking up on Councillor Isaac's question as to why we don't have a second expert input. I'm trying to understand what is the risk of not, as opposed to the risk of actually following what John was requesting. There doesn't seem to be a cost, but there seems to be an increased level of confidence.
I think there would be an increase. Well, I think investors, advisors will have different views, so it will create a richer discussion. But they will also both charge fees, so there would be a fee implication for the council. And if Sue wants to add anything to that.
So I think it's worth noting that during the time that KPMG were providing their 6-monthly updates, we also had the same updates giving us the same information and the same results from Arlene Close. So KPMG changed their structure and actually withdrew their facility, if you like, for undertaking that advice. And at the same time, we were retendering for our Treasury Management Advisor, and that was awarded to Arlene Close. And on the basis that they provide us with the same information, giving us the same results, there seemed, and the stability of the actual bond funds, at that time, there was no necessity, in my opinion, as 151 officer, to have a second expert opinion. But I think, as my opening gambit is, once we've been through this current process of understanding what we need for capital investment purposes, which I believe will be quite substantial over the next few years, we may actually not have a significant, and even, if it's 45 after what we're doing at the moment, we may not actually have a significant external bond fund anyway. And in terms of what's left, a periodic review, I think, would more than satisfy, having a periodic check in terms of that activity. But what we're not asking them to do is, check Arlene Close's advice and support. It's a different viewpoint looking at the same information.
One other thing I would add is that when, and this has been the consistent position for the last 12 months at least, when one looks at the performance of the bonds that council officers have invested into maturity, it has regularly outperformed budget, and it's the pooled bond funds where we have had more challenging performance on a couple of those funds in particular, which for the first time we've seen highlighted with the red and the amber in that list at the back. If anyone else has anything else to add to the debate at this stage. Councillor Tustain.
It's a bit of a question really. So if we're selling off these bonds, we're putting this money into capital investment, then that's obviously going to have an impact on our revenue. Now, something that Councillor James mentioned earlier about the delays in getting capital projects running, where's the money sitting in the meanwhile while we're waiting for capital projects? And what if there's delays on some of these capital projects as well? What will happen then?
Sue?
So the reason why we have quite a lot in liquidity cash is because so we have short-term, medium-term and long-term investments. We monitor what we think we need to fund the capital programme over the period of the MTFS, and then we invest accordingly in terms of the funds that we need to have available in any given financial year. This is one of the reasons why it's really important to get profiling right on capital spend, because that affects our decisions around treasury management. So essentially they sit in either the medium-term funds that we have or in short-term cash.
There's one other thing I would add. If you look at chart 3 on page 51, that's a chart we've seen before at this committee, but it has a new line on it, which is the base rate return. This chart compares the current valuation capital gains and losses against what we would call absolute return or total return, which includes the income that those investments have generated over 10 years. As you can see, the orange line and the blue line, and the base rate return shows what we would have had available to invest in resident services if we'd simply invested in a AAA bank bond, for lack of a better description, or a government gilt, perhaps. Actually, it's probably a better description. So I think, and that's a new addition to that chart, and I've always had a bit of a difficulty with that chart because that was missing. So that's great to see. I think what it does is it tells us as well that, you know, those decisions taken back in 2014 and 2015 have benefited residents. We have generated a better return than we would have done if we'd just held cash. And I think that comes back partly to Councillor Tom's question as well. I think it seems to me that, unless anyone has anything else they want to add at this stage, Councillor Phillimore.
Well, I'm going to just politically disagree with you on that point, really, because we've come from a historic position where our interest rates, when I was first on audit and accounts, were less than 1%, and there were politically alternative ways of getting a better return on your money. So I tend to disagree with that.
I think it's a fair point. I wasn't suggesting that it was the right place to invest. I was just suggesting the decision to invest somewhere other than gilts was the right decision. But I believe you're probably referring to residential property, Councillor Phillimore.
I might have made that point numerous times.
I think, so in conversations with the Section 151 officer, the recommendation of this committee was going to be that the Treasury Management Strategy includes a periodic independent assessment of our externally managed funds. So I got all the wording right on that part. And that period was going to be 5 years. And I presume the people that we selected to do that review were yet to be selected through a selection process that this committee may or may not take part in or may ratify. I think, I think the question has broadened this evening on the basis of the debate from, is this committee happy to put forward that recommendation, or would this committee like to go further in its recommendation that it would like to review the Treasury Management Strategy in greater detail than that? Sue?
Just to remind everybody, obviously the Treasury Management Strategy comes back to this committee, the proposed strategy comes back to this committee in January for comment and review. So you'll have an opportunity then as well to review on the overall strategy.
Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, it's simple as far as I'm concerned. The recommendation's fine, apart from the fact that it's 5 years. 5 years is no good to man or beast, really. So much happens in a year, let alone 5 years. So I'm saying that we should be looking to get a periodic check by outside financial specialists, so that everyone involved in the management of the finances of this council has at least can demonstrate that we've taken the opportunity to check that what's being done by our own in-house team, and in fairness to them, I think that it would be good for them to know that what they're doing is being sort of examined and given some sort of reassurance. So I'm saying that it would be good practice for this council to have periodic reviews by an external financial advisor, and that should be more frequently than every 5 years.
What period do you suggest, John?
Well, I'm happy to leave to hear what the chief financial officer says on that one.
Sue?
I will take it under thought process, John, and include what I feel is appropriate in the Treasury Management Strategy update.
Is Councillor Tustain?
I think obviously owing to Sue's expertise and obviously the authority to manage this process, but I think what might make sense would be, rather than tying in a specific period, it may be reviewing it and thinking about if I mean, for example, sometimes we have big external events that cause massive problems like the Ukraine war, for example. So if it was left there when you get these sudden things happening, so it may be something that's a little bit more open and might not be necessarily something cast in stone. Just a thought.
So perhaps a period with an opportunity to shorten the period for unusual events. Sue?
So obviously we would do that anyway as part of our ongoing management of the thingy. So we can, you know, it's inherent, but if you feel more comfortable with us writing it in, that's fine. But obviously I will make my recommendation as part of the Treasury Management Strategy. This committee obviously will have the ability to put their thoughts forward for the version that goes to council in terms of, and I will obviously, along with anything else that comes in January, respond to any of those recommendations that are made.
Thank you, Sue. I think the other important thing to note here is that this committee's challenge on this point is in no way intended to indicate that we think that officers aren't doing a great job. Actually, you are, and that's my view. And I'll get a few nods around the table. But it's really, I think it's really what it comes back to what Councillor Isaac said, which is that, you know, he didn't use the words "what happens when it goes wrong," but it's really about that second opinion and that reassurance for residents and residents' money. I behind the scenes, I've learned a lot more about how our treasury management happens. There's regular meetings and monthly minutes produced, and each of the investments is challenged on a monthly basis and fully minuted. There's a lot of work goes into it. I think the open question is who's watching the watchers. If there's no more to add to the debate, I'll ask members to note the. I believe it's to note the report. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, which is a review of the effectiveness of this committee. So the Audit and Accounts Committee have requested a formal review of the effectiveness of the committee. As agreed at the last meeting in September, members of the committee completed a survey based on SIPF's self-assessment of good practice. This report sets out the results of that survey. I'll ask Adam Swain to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few slides which just summarises the information that's in the report, but just for use of the committee. So just as a reminder, the SIPFA survey includes 40 questions. There's a maximum score of 200 from this, and responses could range from major improvement, which is scores as 0, to no further improvement, which is a score of 5. We also included, as asked by the committee, a response of unsure for where members who were responding weren't sure of what their view was on that question. And the total average score from all members that responded was 115.65 out of 200. there were a total of 7 responses received, so 78% of members. So thank you for taking the time to respond. We did receive 65 answers to the questions of unsure, indicating some sort of complexity in some of the questions being asked by the survey. There were 6 questions which scored an average of requiring significant improvement, and a further 13 that required moderate improvement. So they've really formed the basis of the themes that I've pulled out in the report. And there were also 4 individual responses identified as requiring major improvement. So I've taken those into account again in the themes identified and the recommendations. I won't go through in great detail, but these are the questions where identified as requiring significant improvement. So there were a couple around the committee publishing an annual report, and again knowledge and training came out as the theme in this as well, and having an action plan to improve areas of weakness, and then the 13 that related to requiring moderate improvement. Again, included one around an annual report and some of the terms of reference, whether they address the SIF's position statement, along with the knowledge and skills of the committee. So the themes arising identified as requiring significant and moderate improvement were need to review the effectiveness of the committee, develop an action plan to address the weaknesses identified, consider producing an annual report on the work undertaken by the committee, undertake an assessment of the training needs and implement an associated programme of training for members, review the committee's work programme to ensure that it covers the core areas as set out in SIF's position statement. So a couple of questions to the committee here, which we can come to in a minute, around whether you agree with the themes identified or whether there's any other that you think should be a focus. I'll just go on to the last slide, and then we can come back to the questions. So in terms of next steps, some steps that I think could be taken to address the themes identified could be undertaking a skills and training needs assessment to understand whether there's areas where committee members feel that they need some additional training that we can provide as officers or external providers. A review of the work programme, again, just to ensure that it does align with the core functions of the committee, and consider producing a report to provide a summary to council on the work of the committee for the year, and a kind of summary of the effectiveness. Again, sort of the questions here for you are around whether you agree with these actions or if there's any other actions that the committee wish to take. So I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Adam. I did my own little summary that I shared with Adam after the results came out, and I did another one this afternoon just to try and help distill down the conversation. My conclusions really were that if you take the premise that we want to improve and that we've identified some things we want to improve or would like to consider improving, then the best framework for doing that is to have an action plan, and we don't have an action plan. So my first recommendation, if you like, was that we agree as a committee to put an action plan in place to address things. I'm getting nods around the table for that, so that makes sense. One of the I guess Adam's already identified the key themes that came from that were training and skills, accountability to full council, and what that looks like in the form of a sort of annual report of our effectiveness or what we've considered during the year. And then there's a sort of tail of sort of minor issues that fit under those headings and or sit alongside some of those on their own. So I was going to suggest that the top item of the action plan is that Audit Committee publishes an annual report that goes to full council each June. I think that's the cycle we discussed would be the most appropriate, and that would start in June 24. I'm not anticipating it would be a particularly long report. It would contain some reassurance that we've carried out our, if you like, our statutory duties in approving the annual accounts, and that it would talk about this effectiveness review that we carried out as as an approach to self-evaluation and improvement. Councillor Falconer, I can see you.
Yeah, I think this committee is obviously in a very different position compared to, say, scrutiny or CEP, because our work programmes are very rigidly fixed according to our responsibilities. The agendas for every meeting is well trodden. There are things like we do annual statements as the chairman for the external auditors. So a lot of that, in terms of the work of the committee and what it does, is embodied in that statement. I don't know if that statement then goes to the cabinet, for instance, but that could be the basis of a year-end report, because we are, as a committee, are looking at, say, the fixed issues that the remit of this committee as per the constitution. So we don't have the flexibility of, say, scrutiny to call Hampshire Stagecoach and say, come and talk to us about transport in the borough. We do treasury management, and our focus is defined as being governance, fraud and risk. So we don't, as it were, go out on those into other areas, because those other areas are covered by other committees. So I think we do quite a lot of what is being required.
Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Faulkner, but what we've been tasked to do is talk about the effectiveness of this committee, really, and by in terms of filling in questionnaires, etc. And is there any enthusiasm to create a working group to consider whether the current terms of reference suffice and whether there are any opportunities to strengthen our governance?
I think it's not a bad idea. I know what other people think. Councillor Tustain agrees. Sound of silence from elsewhere. Oh, Sue?
Obviously, anything the working group wants to recommend will come back to this committee for recommendation and endorsement. But I'll just clarify, obviously, the terms of reference are covered by the Constitution.
I think so. I think we'll come back to the training and skills bit, because I think that's another unit. But so I think, just going back to the last point, are we agreed that this committee will make some sort of report to council that is a written report, i.e. beyond a verbal report? I wasn't quite sure whether Councillor Falconer was in agreement with that or not. I think he was pointing out the other things we already do and trying to work out.
Yeah, the other committees do that. What I was saying actually was that some of the things that you might wish to report to council are already embodied in the statements we make to the external auditors, etc. So it's not, shall we say, as big a task as you might feel.
So that comes back to, I think, that the report should be short, because I think that a single line that says that we've carried out our statutory duties in line with the Constitution is that sort of reassurance statement, and then the other things that we've done on top of that. And I think it's interesting that you raised treasury management and property, because those, I think, are two functions that this committee does that do not sit within the normal remit of an audit committee elsewhere, and that's because of the unique nature of the arrangements of this council. And other councils will have other aspects on their work agenda that are unique to them. So, Councillor Falconer.
It's quite a peculiarity. This committee, in my 10 years, often wondered why things were structured as they are, i.e. scrutiny does performance, whereas this does treasury management. But I was quite amazed when the SIPFA guidelines came out that their recommendations for an audit committee, they included treasury management. So it's actually a SIPFA environment, not just the fact we got a very wonderful position compared to Birmingham, Thurrock or any other of these unfortunate.
Thank you. Councillor Tustain.
Thank you, Chair. I think one thing about doing a report, this is actually considering, although it is a potentially quite a small amount of media response from the public, but making everything as transparent as possible, because this is the public's money, and I think making it so it becomes a little bit more, people become aware of what we do, because I think this committee can actually disappear into the background when actually it's very, very important. So having a report that goes to council, which is potentially going into the public domain, can add that link out there to actually emphasise that we are being very prudent, we are doing the right things, we are doing our due diligence internally, which then can be picked up. And I think there is a value in that just from that perspective alone.
Thank you, Councillor Tustain. I think that's what's you absolutely summarised there. What's behind the SIP for guidance and why it's in there. Thank you, Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a suggestion. I am not a subject expert. Regarding the survey, I think it would be better to make the questionnaire a bit more simplified, because it was a little bit tough for me. That's why probably most of the answers were unsure.
But don't underestimate. I think all of us found it quite challenging. We all found it quite challenging, and there were quite a lot of unsure responses. And last time around, I think I encouraged people to stay if they were unsure, because I think that leads us nicely on actually to the training point and the skills audit. I think Richard Harbour's not here tonight, but that appointment of a layperson or an independent non-councillor member is intended to help with the skills matrix. I think Adam raises in his presentation there that we might benefit from a skills audit. I've talked about them before. I've not done one. I don't know how in depth it is or how detailed it needs to be. I'd like to keep it simple if we could, but I think if that would then help to inform what a training program or sort of training materials might look like for this committee going forward. And I'm not thinking or planning that we want to deluge people this year. I'm thinking about building a structure that will benefit Audit Committee for the next 3 to 5 years. So
one of the things I haven't actually seen recently is the handbook for Audit and Accounts Committee. So that might be something that we could culminate into an update of the handbook that obviously don't need to discuss as the terms of reference, but gives a bit more insight in terms of what's meant to happen around each subject.
thank you. I wasn't aware there was a handbook. That sounds like a good start. Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, I actually stumbled across it the other day. I was sifting through a drawer of past report packs, and yes, I found it. It hasn't been updated, I don't think, for 4 years. But yes, gosh, that's at the start of every committee year. The handbook would be handed to all the new committee members.
So that's great. Thank you, Councillor Faulkner. That sounds like a good start. Certainly, if it hasn't had a scrub for 4 years, then it sounds like it could do with an update, which is great. Back to Councillor Phillimore's point. I think so. We've covered. We would like an action plan. We would like to do some sort of report to full council in June. We would like to do a skills audit and update training and guidance for the audit committee. I think that nails about 7 or 8 of the main significant concerns, or whatever the phrase was, significant issues. And then there were a raft of minor ones, some of which overlapped with some of those, some of which were slightly different. Some of them grouped around our terms of reference, which, as Sue kindly pointed out, is our constitution. I think they are probably too detailed and technical, maybe, to go into tonight. So I don't think it would create a working group that would need to meet more than once. But I think that if people were prepared to meet separately to create a working group, to just go through and just consider what's in our terms of reference that meets the SIP for guidance, what is perhaps missing, and what perhaps we consider to be wider functions, and then we document that, then I think the appropriate channel for that, and I'm happy to be corrected, would be that would be referred to the Constitutional Working Group, and then they would then either take that forward or not. So
Absolutely. So that would be shared with Fiona the monitoring officer, who would then obviously discuss that at the constitutional working group in terms of the final updates that she's doing and bringing back to council in the new year.
Great. So I mean, I'm happy to be on the working group. I don't know how many we need. We probably only need 3. Is anyone else up for it? Thank you, Councillor Fillmore. I'm looking for another hand.
I'm happy to participate, but I get parole in May when my time is up.
So we'll count Councillor Fillmore in, and we'll get it done soon. I think we'll come on to the work programme, but the work programme for January and March is very busy, and that was one of the reasons I was quite keen to make more than slight progress on this point tonight, actually. Sue.
Obviously, if it's helpful, myself and Fiona are more than happy to come along and talk through those various points to help you understand the current position.
Thank you. There was a couple of other points that I'd drawn out, which was, and I think that, some of these have been addressed, or we've agreed to address them already, but we've not actually programmed them in, but they should probably sit in the action plan as well. One was the opportunity to meet privately with the external auditors. The other one was how and if we build an opportunity to meet privately with the head of internal audit in the work programme. And then I think the other one we mentioned last time, and it even made it onto the other action list we have, which was, and I don't know how this one would sit, so I'm really open to views on this one, whether or not we have a sort of standing recommendation to group leaders that appointed members to audit committee need to be appropriately experienced and or skilled and or should be required to attend the appropriate training and or read the handbook, and should not be rotated unnecessarily. And this is probably the controversial bit that I'm not settled on, but that, I don't know how this would be exercised, but potentially the chair has absolute discretion to decline substitutes. And I must admit, I was quite pleased there wasn't a substitute tonight, because I think Councillor Falcon has more experience of substitutes turning up and there being quite a large education curve. But I know it's something that's been raised before. I don't know what people think of that. So.
On the point of substitutes, that would definitely be a constitutional issue, but obviously not to say you can't make that recommendation, but it's not something that obviously the committee can make a decision on.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Councillor Tusting.
Sorry, Chair. Just considering with things like planning, you have to do a certain level of training, considering the nature of the importance of this. I don't know if that would be constitutional change. But whether there should be some kind of initial training that's attended at least before you attend this.
Licensing committee and planning, it's mandatory because it's statutory, isn't it? This wouldn't be statutory, so you're right, we'd have to give it some sort of force or enforcement, and I think that would probably be constitutional.
I think because it's not a statutory committee as such, I think it comes back to the strong encouragement from officers, group leaders, and a strong requirement, in terms of just being able to help yourselves in terms of how you deal with committee matters during the year.
I think there's also, thank you, Sue. I think there's also we have to just think that if we get an election and we end up with a whole bunch of fairly green councillors, then we don't want to have written into our constitution something that's then going to hamstring us. So. Anyway, it's one perhaps for the working group to have a bit more to think about and come back with an idea or recommendation. I wasn't intended to be. It did come across like that. You should join us on the group, John. Okay. Oh, a forecast on the election result. Sorry, no, I thought you meant I was pre-calling the results of the working group. Yes, it was a forecast on the election. So, if there's nothing else to add on that point, I just want to thank everyone for taking part in that and that questionnaire. As Councillor Tom identified, it wasn't straightforward, and it took a bit of thought, and it puts us outside of our comfort zone as well. So, thank you for doing that. Sue has something to add.
And I think, Councillor Basham, you've already said this, but I'd like to say a massive thank you to Adam for all the work that he's done on this, because it's been a really, very detailed and time-consuming piece of work for everybody, including the officers. So thank you, Adam, for the work that you've done on this.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I hadn't said that, but I do echo it, and thank you very much. So if we move on to item 10, Audit and Accounts Work Programme. I already alluded to the fact we've got a pretty busy January and I think an even busier March. I would, and I know we covered this last time, I will just raise it again. I'm not expecting people to change their mind, but constitutionally, we are only required to bring the Treasury Management report, and I don't even know how often we're required to bring the property report forward, but we bring them forward quarterly at the moment. We could bring the investment one forward 6 monthly. I know this committee voted last time not to do that, and that's fine. I don't intend to unpick that, but I just want to say that in the context of a challenging work programme, and so we shouldn't be shy about what we take off the list if we're putting extra things on the list. That's all. Adam.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say the external audit planning report and the timing for the other external reports in the work programme are a bit fluid at the moment, as there's still not been a decision as to what's going to happen with external audit deadlines and such.
So this is a decision that we're waiting for from government about whether or not they're going to allow councils to wave through certain unaudited accounts. Sue, do you want to cover how that might impact us?
So government are being pressed to try and come to a decision as soon as possible, if not by the end of this calendar year, in terms of the position on the back date of audits. Clearly, you have a number of councils like ourselves that have been through their audits and had their accounts signed off, and we're now only looking at the 1 year that's unaudited. There are some authorities that still have several years that haven't been audited. And also, when you take a council like Basingstoke, for example, no specific issues raised, good value for money, ongoing concern, as opposed to some authorities who may find themselves in particularly difficult situations where it might be deemed that actually, given their position, it might be more important to focus the available audit resources on those particular councils. And therefore, there may be potentially, not saying there will be, there might be a reduced scope. So our external auditors, EY at the moment, are talking to us about undertaking the value for money audit, which to some extent gives the assurance around the ongoing viability of the council as a going concern, and would pick up any significant governance and risk-related issues. In terms of the detail, have we put the transaction, through correctly? That doesn't necessarily change the bottom line of the council, of the revenues. It's just that have we applied the code correctly? So I think making sure that value for money audits, etc., are undertaken, management, looking at management overrides and things like that are really important for a council that has traditionally follows the code, has unqualified accounts. It may well be that we don't have a full audit going forward. But you would not want that to be not going forward. I mean, just for that one financial year in order for them to get up together. So what you're effectively still getting is the overall assurance of the ongoing viability of the council, that the funds are effectively being used. What you're not getting is necessarily whether the full transactions have gone through linked to the code. But obviously that would be picked up in the following year's audit anyway, in terms of your balances brought forward. So the risk around that is quite limited.
That's a really important point, actually, and it's quite a technical accounting point. When auditors audit accounts, they're actually auditing 3 years, but they're auditing 2 years of presented data. So they're auditing what we call the brought forward balances. So the opening position 2 years ago, the closing position at the end of year 2, the opening position at the beginning of year 1, which is the same as the closing position at the end of year 2, and then the closing position at the end of year 1. So accounts will say 2024 at the top, those have been audited. Accounts say 2023 at the top, those have been audited. And the opening numbers that we use to bring those 2023 numbers in will also have been audited. So if we're in a situation where we miss a year's, or we have a different scope of audit for a particular year, Sue's point there is a very valid one, that it would be picked up to some extent in the following year if the scope reverted back. I have a question about that though, Sue. If, depending on what the government says, and depending on how KPMG interpret that, where does the scope for that decision lie? Is that a Section 151 officer decision? Is it a committee decision? Is it a full council decision? Or is it a KPMG decision?
So our external auditors are EY.
Sorry, KPMG and EY.
No, so government will have to pass legislation in relation to the years in question, in terms of what audit process will be taken through. And our individual auditors will then have to apply that legislation. So we have no scope in terms of the external auditors, because it's within the limited range of external auditor resources that are available generally, that we will meet a certain criteria within the legislation, and that's what we will be offered.
So this may be foisted on us?
Yes. Simply.
Okay. Have a think about that, and come back if you have any questions over the course of before the next meeting and or whenever, because it's have a think about it, because it's a pretty big issue that we would have a reduced scope audit. It would, however, save taxpayers quite a lot of money. Audit fees are scheduled to go up by quite a lot. And so it may free up quite a lot of money to invest in resident services or lower fees, or however else the Cabinet may decide that was appropriate. Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, Chair, I get all the points raised by Councillor Fortner and obviously Sue about statutory reporting. All I'm saying on the work programme is there's 7 items on January and 7 items on March. Are all those necessary to be dealt with on those dates?
Sue.
The annual property plan, treasury management strategy and capital investment strategy do absolutely need to come to this committee in January, because they will go to Cabinet and Council in February with any comments or thoughts from this committee. It is possible to move the internal audit progress report back and bring an updated report in March. I would strongly suggest that we do actually have the external investment funds monitoring, because that links heavily to the strategy that you will be reviewing at the same meeting in terms of going forward. And as Adam has already said, it is possible we won't actually have the external audit planning report for 22-23 in January anyway, because obviously we don't know what the extent of that report is. So I think, and the review of social networking sites, I would be content if the committee were to bring that in March.
Thank you, Sue. Perhaps we'll make that decision near the time. I think the view of social networking sites is usually a quite short paper anyway. Maybe better to get it out of the way. Thank you, Councillor Phillimore, for your input. There is one item actually that I wanted to just raise that we should have picked up under item, I think it was 7, but it was with regards to the investment appendix. Can we please, Councillor Phillimore's point about the CCLA Property Fund, I think is apposite, and I think it was possibly an oversight in Councillor Cubitt's question that wasn't included. And I think if we're going to use it for training materials, it would be useful to have that in there, if it could be added to that appendix, so that we have a holistic paper for that. That'd be great.
Yeah, happy to add that in. It's just obviously it wasn't covered by the original KPMG monitoring, which is why I think it was left out.
Understood. If there are no other questions, there's nothing that we need to exclude the press and the public for, as far as I'm aware. And there are no confidential or exempt items for information. So it just leaves me to thank any officers for the hard work that they put in that I didn't thank on the way through, and to thank you all for coming and for your input tonight. It's been a useful conversation. I think we're making good progress. So I'll call the meeting closed at 8 o'clock. Thank you. Goodbye.